Hey guys, so this week we are going to start chapter 21. This is a lengthy chapter, so typically when we're actually at the school, we do usually break this chapter up into 2 weeks. So we'll do the first half this week, and then we'll do the second half next week. We do the same thing with chapter 20. The only difference is there's only one test for chapter 21, and there's two tests for chapter 20. So this week and next week, there won't be a test this week. Pretty much there will just be one next Friday, and I'll make sure you guys are prepared for that and everything. Hopefully you guys are all enjoying yourselves and staying sane. I got a little sunburnt the other day from sitting outside. I love being outside. And I did get a dog. We rescued him. His name's Bruce. He's in his crate right now, so that way he's not climbing on me. But there he is, all snuggled up. He's a little crazy, so that's what's new with me right now. Kind of going a little nuts here. So, chapter 21 does start on page 670. So, this is a very important chapter. In my opinion, it's probably the most important chapter that you will study as a junior, just because this is where if you choose to do hair, this is where a bulk of your income will most likely come from. And if it doesn't, you want to make it that way. Colors, you can charge a lot for, depending on experience, the products you use, things like that, how long it takes you, blah, blah, blah. I can charge my clients anywhere from $150 to $200 depending on what they're getting done. Sometimes more than that if it's a big project, especially color corrections, which you guys, when you first get out into the salon, color corrections, you're probably going to get a lot of them just because they take so much time, and you'll probably have the time for them in your book. Hair coloring too, if you are a more creative person, this is going to be your outlet. You can do all kinds of crazy colors, especially nowadays. We have the vivids, things like that. It's very important that you have that basic color theory understanding. Even if you choose not to do hair color, it's something you want to be comfortable with. Because for makeup example, when we talked about it last unit, you need to be familiar with the different skin tones and what complements what, blah, blah, blah. It's just something you really want to have a good understanding of. And I'll be honest, like hair coloring and things like that, I would say I didn't have a true understanding of until I'm going to say I was probably licensed for 2 years before it finally clicked. I remember the one salon I was at, I just would ask the girls all the time what to mix up because I didn't understand it, So my goal is to make sure that you guys understand the basics more than I did. So on page 671 in your textbook, the very first thing I would like you to highlight in that top corner, it's underneath the did you know, highlight the definition of hair color, the one word, which is the professional industry coined term referring to artificial hair coloring products and services. So when we, talk to our clients, we want to be as professional as possible. So instead of saying hair dye, we're going to say hair color. If you see hair color with 2 words, that is referring to the natural hair color that grows out of your head. Hair color 1 word, artificial. Hair color 2 words is natural. Okay? When we do color services, it is very important that we know what we're talking about, and that way we can explain to the clients, right? We have to be able to take into account what they have on their hair, what they naturally have, what their goal is, if we can even get them to where they want to be in one session, blah, 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 things like that. So underneath on 671 still, where it says reviewing hair facts, highlight where it says the structure of the client's hair and the desired results determine which hair color to use. So we have to kind of know what we're starting with, and then we can kind of build from there, right? Because sometimes we can actually use the client's tone that they currently have in their hair to our advantage, right? So say they're a brassy blonde and they want to be red, they already have that warm pigment from the breast, so we can actually build off of that instead of, doing an entire formula to fill it, if that makes sense, which we'll get into filling and toning on all that. So the hair structure, of course, we've already talked about. So we know that it's the cuticle, which is going to be that outside shingle type layer. And then we have the cortex, which is going to be that inner strength. So over on 672, if you want to highlight where it says the cortex is the middle layer and gives the hair a majority of its strength and elasticity. Continue highlighting where it says a healthy cortex contributes about 80% to the overall strength of the hair. And highlight as well the natural pigment. It contains the natural pigment called melanin. So we did talk about this, I believe it was chapter 11 that we just previously did, right? And then of course we do know that the medulla is only in some clients. Not every client has it. Usually only the ones who have coarse, dark hair. So then we have hair texture. So if you want to highlight where it says hair texture is the diameter of the individual hair strands, right? So we know that the very thick strand is going to be coarse. If it's medium, it's going to be medium. And then if it's a small diameter, then it's going to be fine hair. At the bottom of that texture paragraph, highlight where it says coarse textured hair has a larger diameter and loosely grouped melanin granules, so it takes longer to process. So we need to keep hair texture in mind when we're doing a color service for a client, because like it does say in the book, it could take longer to process depending on, say they have very coarse, dark brown hair, right? And they want to be like bright blonde. If it's their natural hair color, we could probably do it in one session, but it would take a good couple hours, right? Because typically, and this is not always the case, but typically if you have coarse hair, you also have thick hair. So it's going to take longer to actually apply the color and then to let it process, right? So from there we can determine, okay, if she's a level 6 and she wants to be this level, then I need to use 30 developer or 20 developer, blah, blah, blah. And we'll get into the different developers as well. Then we have density, so that's going to be the thickness of the hair. Somebody who has very dense hair is going to have thick hair. If there's less hairs per square inch, then it's going to be fine or thin hair. Okay, so then porosity. So highlight where it says porosity is the hair's ability to absorb moisture. Highlight where it says low porosity, the cuticle is tight, the hair is resistant, which means it is difficult for moisture or chemicals to penetrate. So typically low porosity in the hair is associated with healthy hair. For example, the hair is not very porous, so it doesn't absorb moisture very quickly. In, say, a young teenager who's never had her hair colored before and she just gets a haircut, and it's going to feel like you're drying her hair forever because the hair just isn't absorbing that moisture because it doesn't need it, because it's healthy. And with high porous hair, if you think of like a blonde, for example, my ends dry so quick versus up here because my ends are just so porous from over processing it and blah, blah, blah. As far as testing for porosity, if you want to highlight this, it says take several strands of the hair from 4 different areas of the head: the front hairline, the temple, the crown, and the nape. So basically in those different areas, those are the hot spot areas, right? So basically in the book, they're just saying you can just run your fingers over and you'll be able to feel, and oftentimes you will. Like if I touch my hair up here, it feels pretty soft, but then as I move down, it gets a little bit more, my friends and I always call it crunchy ends. But that's kind of what it'll feel like. It'll just feel like a little bit more, like it just feels dry, you know what I'm saying? Also too, like I said, when the hair, like if you shampoo a client's hair, depending on how fast the hair dries, if it dries very quickly, it's probably more porous. And if it takes forever, then it's most likely low porosity. So over on 673, identifying natural hair tone. Obviously the last chapter we talked about melanin. So eumelanin is the hair that tends to be darker browns and blacks, whereas pheomelanin is the blonde and the reds, the strawberry blondes, right? So if you guys remember my analogy that I used last week, you can remember pheomelanin like Phoebe from Friends is a blonde. That's how I remember it. So then we have the level system, right? So on a scale from 1 to 10, that's how we determine how dark somebody's natural hair is, or the hair that they have on their head, right? So 1 is going to be the darkest, 10 will be the lightest. So my roots, we could say they're like a 6, and my ends, I would maybe say they're like an 8 or a 9. So more blonde on the ends, darker up top. And that's kind of just the look right now. So go ahead and highlight the definition of the level system. It is the system that colorists use to determine the lightness or darkness of a hair color. And then highlight where it says on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the darkest and 10 being the lightest, like I just mentioned. So typically you'll have like a swatch book depending on where you are. If you're at a salon or even at the school, we have a couple. And it will be like a little pamphlet. Usually it's like a fan shape, and it has like all the different hair colors on it. And from there you can kind of determine the client's natural tone and the tone that they have on their ends by matching it up to one of the little swatches on that little pamphlet. So identifying the natural level on page 674. So highlight where it says your most valuable tool is the color wheel, which is very true. As long as you have a basic understanding of color theory, and as long as you take the time to actually think through what you're mixing up, I think you will be fine, right? So then do like a little, underneath identifying your natural level, there's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, just do a little bracket there and kind of read over that, how to do a test strand. But basically, when you're taking those little swatches that I was just talking about, and you're matching it up to the hair, typically you want to take hair from this section because this is where it tends to be the darkest. So you lift that section up, and then you'll take your little swatch thing, and usually if you go in, I don't have a swatch book with me right now, unfortunately, but if you take each little like hair sample and you stick it in, right, it should blend right in with whichever level it is. So if I were to take a level 6 swatch and stick it, like interlock it with the swatch, they would blend right in together. Now if I put like a level 10 in here, it would not blend as nicely. And then I usually do that like where their natural color is, and then if I'm trying to match it up to the color on their ends, then I'll do the same thing on their ends. So then gray hair. Gray hair is a little bit tricky. I know in the last chapter it said that gray hair is not, it's a myth that it's resistant, but I actually disagree with that. I do find that gray hair is more resistant, especially if it's like the white gray hair. I find that it's so hard to sometimes get that to stick. So with gray hair, along with those little swatch books, there's usually swatches for gray hair. So there's 25%, 50%, and 75% gray is another way that we kind of determine how to come up with formulas. So with gray hair, because it's lacking natural pigment, so on page 675 then, underneath color theory, highlight where it says color is described as a property of objects that depends on the light they reflect and is perceived by the human eye as red, yellow, blue, or other shades. Highlight 2 underneath where it says the law of color. Highlight where it says the law of color is a system for understanding color relationships, which we will get into now. So we have primary colors. So over on 676, most of you guys, I'm sure, have learned about primary colors in high school or even elementary school. So we know that the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. So please highlight the definition of primary colors, which are the pure fundamental colors that cannot be created by combining any other colors. So these, if you are to break down every color, anything, you will always be able to break it down to red, yellow, and blue, the very basics. So blue is going to be the strongest primary color, if you want to highlight that. It is the only cool toned primary color. So also to highlight where it says blue also brings depth or darkness to a color. So say we add a blue-based pigment to a hair color, it's actually going to make it appear darker. So that's why sometimes if somebody's brassy and we do a cool tone like blue shampoo or purple shampoo or even the cool tone toners on the hair, oftentimes you will find that the hair is initially darker than what we lifted it to. And that's just, it just brings it down, the cooler colors, because warmer colors reflect light, which makes the hair appear lighter. So red is a medium primary color. So then we have secondary colors. Secondary colors are created by mixing primary colors. So we know that red and yellow makes orange, red and blue will make purple, and yellow and blue makes green, right? And then we have tertiary colors. So highlight that definition. Tertiary is an immediate color achieved by mixing a secondary color and its neighboring primary color on the color wheel in equal amounts. So if you take the secondary color, there's going to be 2 tertiary colors for every secondary color. So for example, we have orange. So the 2 colors that make up orange are going to be red and yellow, which means we can have red orange or yellow orange. There's no blue orange, no such thing. It's only going to be the colors that create it, right? And then 2, when we refer to tertiary colors, we always say the primary color first and the secondary color second. So it's always going to be blue violet or yellow green, right? It's never going to be green yellow or orange red. Always red orange, yellow green, blue violet, red violet. And then we have complementary colors. Over on page 677, highlight where it says complementary colors are primary and secondary colors positioned directly opposite each other on the color wheel. If you want to highlight that. So basically, if you look at the color wheel, there's a good one at the bottom of 677 here. You will see that across from each primary color, there is a secondary color. So what that means is when you mix that primary color with that secondary color, it cancels each other out. So basically what happens is if you mix all 3 primary colors together, blue, yellow, and red, you mix them together, you get brown or natural or neutral, right? That's what all the colors combined together makes. So when you mix yellow and violet, for example, you're not really mixing violet and yellow. What you're really mixing is yellow with blue and red, because doesn't blue and red make violet, which means when you mix yellow with violet, you're mixing all 3 primary colors. Same thing with red and green. Green is made of yellow and blue, so when we mix green with red, we're creating that neutral color. So one thing that always helped me remember which colors cancel out which. So if you think of red and green mixed together, those are Christmas colors. If you think of orange and blue mixed together, those are going to be like fall or Halloween colors. And then if you mix violet and yellow together, those are going to be Easter colors, right? So that's kind of what always helped me remember what goes across with what. So that was a trick that always helped me in the salon. If I was doing a color correction and somebody lifted orange, I would think, okay, what cancels out orange? I'd go Christmas, fall, Easter. So what are the fall colors? It's going to be orange and blue. And then I knew to cancel out, I knew that the color I mixed up for my color correction had to have a blue base in it if I wanted to cancel out orange. Also on 678, there is a little chart here. It says an easy reference guide. It just goes through and it says what cancels out what. So then we have the tone or hue of color. So under tone, It is the balance of color. So there's 3 tones, which are going to be warm, cool, and neutral. So warm tones are going to be red, orange, and yellow, and of course red, orange, and yellow, orange. And then cool colors are going to be red, violet, violet, blue, blue, green, and green. And then of course neutral, there is an equal amount of both, and that's usually going to be that natural center color when we mix all the primary colors together, which is why it lacks either warm or cool tones. So highlight where it says warm tones reflect more light and they look lighter than their actual level, which is what I was saying before. When you tone somebody with an ashy color, which is a cool color, the client's probably going to say that it looks darker. So usually when I tone my clients' blonde highlights, I just let them know, like, hey, it might be a little dark at first, but after a shampoo or two, it'll lighten up a little bit. Also too, if you have a blonde, say she purple shampoos her hair every time she shampoos, over time, because purple or violet has warm tones to it, we're continuously adding that darker pigment, which is blue, on top of her hair. So eventually what's going to happen is her hair is going to get dull. So say you have a blonde client comes in and she's too ashy or she gets kind of gray. If you add a little bit of gold into her formula, it's actually going to reflect the light a lot more and it's going to give her that more shiny appearance. And then highlight as well where it says cool tones absorb more light, therefore they can look deeper than their actual level, which I kind of already talked about. So then intensity refers to the strength of color, if you want to highlight that. And then the base color is going to be the predominant tone of color. So highlight where it says each color is identified by a number and a letter. The number indicates the level and the letter indicates the tone. So hair color is pretty standard in the format that it's written out. So it's always going to be, and if you want to look at the bottom of 678, there's an example there. They're using 6G. So the 6 is going to represent the level, which we talked about. That's the level system, 1 through 10. So the 6, that person's a level 6, so it's probably going to be a medium brown. And then G is going to be gold. So gold is typically a yellow-orange tone, I would say, in most color lines. So when you see 6G, that means it's going to be a dark brown and it's going to have a gold predominant tone. Sometimes you will see colors, for example, Matrix has 6RV. So when you see 2 letters, the first letter, right, so we know that 6 is still the level. When we have RV, the R is going to be 75% of the tone and the V is going to be 25%, right? So the R, which usually is red and V is violet, red is going to be that predominant undertone with a slight violet tint, right? Now, if it was switched, it would be 75. If it was, and I don't think that Matrix makes this, but if it was a 6VR, then the violet would be 75% and the R would be 25%. And so it would be predominantly violet with a slight red tone, which would make it a more warm violet. So then on 679, at the very bottom, right before, not the bottom, at the top, where it says neutral base colors are often used to cover gray hair. So when we have gray hair, they're lacking pigment, right? They've lost all their pigment, all their melanin pigments, whatever. So they're lacking all 3 primary colors. In order for us to put anything on top of their hair, they need to have that base pigment. So what a natural is all of the primary colors mixed together. So if you guys go back to page 675, there is a chart about gray hair. The reason I didn't talk about it yet is because I want to talk about color theory first. But when you're formulating for gray hair, most color lines, you have to look at how much gray they have in their hair, right? So like I was saying before, those little swatches, you usually have ones for gray hair as well. So from there, we can determine how much gray is in their hair. So say, for example, they have 25% gray in their hair and they want to be a 6RV in theory, right? We can put the 6RV in their hair, but we just need to make sure that we're mixing 25% natural color in there. So most color lines, it's going to be 6N, right? So I would mix 25% 6N with 75% 6RV. And that would be her formula if she was 25% gray. Luckily though, with Matrix, which that is the one that we use on the salon floor, they do have a natural color series. So that's going to be the 500 series. With that, you don't have to mix it with anything else because they've already formulated that natural pigment in there for you. So for example, they have a 507R. When it has 50 in front of it, that just means it already has the natural pigment in it. It's going to be a level 7 red. R is red, usually. I would say all across the board that the letters are fairly the same. So usually A is ash, B is brown, C is copper, G is going to be gold. Sometimes K is copper too in the European color line. So like Schwarzkopf, I think they have K is going to be copper. M in Matrix is mocha. N's usually natural or neutral. P is typically pearl. R is red. T sometimes it's like a titanium or something. Sorry, I'm like going through the alphabet in my mind. Q, R, S, T. V is going to be violet. Yeah, and usually that's where it takes off. I mean, it varies. Each color line has different numbers and letters for whatever, but that's pretty standard all across the board. The color line we use at my salon is Wella, so actually the colors are by numbers. So a 6N would be a 6/0. So of course still the first number is that level, but then when it's after the stroke, that's going to be the pigment color. Okay. So understanding the hair color types, highlight where it says the classifications of non-oxidative colors are temporary and semi-permanent, traditional. The classifications of oxidative hair color are demi-permanent, deposit only, and permanent, lift and deposit. So the permanent colors, at the school, Matrix is going to be So Color. That's the permanent line. And then the demi-permanent is Color Sync. So you want to learn the difference between the two, when to use when. So we do kind of go into the different colors there. So over on page 680, highlight where it says all permanent hair color products and lighteners contain both a developer or oxidizing agent and an alkalizing agent. The alkalizing agent is usually ammonia or an ammonia substitute. For permanent color does have ammonia in it, and demi-permanent has no ammonia or low ammonia, which we'll get into a little bit then. So basically, for the pH scale, which I'm pretty sure most of you have a pretty good understanding of the pH scale by now. If not, we'll go into it a little bit. But basically, the pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. If it's on this side, it's going to be acidic. If it's 0, if it goes up to 14, then it's alkaline. So the hair typically likes to be more on the acidic side. So it's going to be 4.5 to 5.5. That's where our hair and skin typically likes to fall. So when we put hair color on it, or perms even, if you think about it, we're raising the pH, right? And that's what causes the cuticle to open so that the color can go in there and do its job. So then we have to just make sure after we rinse the color out and everything that we're sealing that cuticle back down. But basically that's what raising the pH of hair means. It just means that we're opening the cuticle. And then that pigment is actually going into the cortex. So the different types of hair color that we have temporary hair color, if you want to highlight that definition. Temporary hair colors are non-oxidization colors that make only a physical change. Because this non-permanent color has large pigment molecules that do not penetrate the cuticle layer, only a coating of color is deposited, which may be removed by shampooing. So examples of this would be maybe like the spray, like fun colors that people use for Halloween. Sometimes those coloring shampoos can be rinsed out. Chalk even would be a temporary hair color. But because those molecules that create the color are so big and it's not nearly as damaging to put it on the hair, so the cuticle's not being raised or anything, this is usually what we would do for sometimes at my salon we have kids come in and they'll be like, oh, I want a pink streak in my hair, and the parent has a heart attack because they're like, oh my gosh, don't put pink in my child's hair. And it's like, okay, we're fine, this will come out in one shampoo. That's usually what we do in those cases. Two, there's colored mousses and gels, mascara, things like that. Another example of a temporary hair color, if you guys have ever heard of the Viral shampoos or the Gemlight shampoos and conditioners, it's a brand called Celeb Luxury. They actually have blues and purples that you can put on your hair, and it will change. If you have blonde hair, for example, it will enhance or it will give you a temporary color. I have this Moroccan oil color mask. It's a rose gold color mask that I've been kind of putting on my hair to maintain that slight gold hue, that rose gold hue to it. But that rinses out after a shampoo or two. It doesn't last very long. So that would be an option for somebody who doesn't want to commit, right? So then we have semi-permanent color. This is a no lift, no deposit, non-oxidization. It's not as strong as a demi-permanent, but it's stronger than a temporary color. So for example, Pravana, Joico, Matrix makes the So-Cult direct. Usually we call them direct deposits. We don't call them semi-permanent. Usually you will hear direct deposit, which means that it doesn't get mixed with a developer, which means the cuticle is not being lifted. It's actually kind of staining the hair. So it lasts a little bit longer than a temporary color. In the book, they say 4 to 6 weeks. I think that really just depends on how well the client takes care of their hair, how often they're shampooing, products that they're using, things like that. And a cool rinse as well for those of you who are interested in doing vivid colors when you get out there. For your vivid clients, I would recommend that they always shampoo with cool water to keep that cuticle sealed and keep the color from fading too quickly. So then we have demi-permanent colors and permanent colors. So this is what you'll probably use the most in the salon between the two. I would say out of demi-permanent and permanent color, you should be using demi-permanent more. And I'll tell you why. So first of all, demi-permanent is no lift, deposit only, which means we can only go darker with demi-permanent. This typically has no ammonia, which is what makes it be a direct deposit only, right? Typically, we only mix demi-permanent with 10 volume. So this is what we'll use. Like I said, demi-permanent, you're probably going to use the most in the salon. So, for example, say you have a teenage client, and she's never colored her hair before, and maybe she just wants a shine to her hair. She still wants to be brunette or whatever color. Say she's a level 6 and she still wants to be brunette, but she just wants to see what it's like to have color in her hair. I don't know. So we would put a demi in her hair because she does not need the strength of ammonia. So we'll talk about permanent colors then. So permanent colors, they lighten and deposit. Demi-permanent, deposit only. Permanent lightens and deposits. So permanent colors are going to be ideal for gray clients. And the reason we want to use permanent on our gray clients is because of that lightening factor in the permanent color, which is the ammonia. Because gray tends to be more resistant, like we talked about, we need to be able to roughen that cuticle up a little bit. So typically with gray color, we do mix 20 volume. So 20 volume, what that does, it actually lifts one level and then deposits. That's what the other 10 does. With demi colors, if you have a client who's not gray and they're going darker, you can do their retouch with demi-permanent. Or say they are a gray client and you've been retouching their hair with permanent color, but over time, say that their permanent color has faded out, you could actually refresh the ends of their hair with the demi-permanent. Because their hair's already been previously lightened by the permanent color, they don't need that additional ammonia on top every time. Plus, too, demi-permanent's a little bit easier to get out of the hair than permanent color is. So for both of these, obviously all hair colors you want to do patch tests. Most clients know if they're allergic to hair color or not. I would say if maybe you're switching color lines and they're sensitive, then I would probably do a patch test. But for the sake of this book, you're supposed to do a patch test every time. So yeah, I would just make a bracket under demi-permanent when to use it. So again, demi-permanents are going to be introducing clients to color, blending or covering gray. So sometimes people don't want a full coverage color. Sometimes people actually like the way the gray kind of shines through the color a little bit. It gives it more of like a sheer coverage you'll hear. And it sometimes actually looks like natural highlights in the hair. So that would be a good way. Say you have somebody who's never colored their hair before and they're just now starting to gray. Again, that would be a good option to do for them. Refreshing faded colors. So say you've been putting that 6RV on a client, right? And you just do their roots. And then maybe every 3 appointments they come in and they need the entire color refreshed. I would refresh it with the demi-permanent. And then making color corrections. So toning is technically color correcting. So when you tone the hair at the shampoo bowl, you're going to use you're going to want to use demi-permanent. Just because if their hair was highlighted, it's already going to be dry and dull from the lightener. So the demi-permanent's actually going to give it more of a shine. Permanent color, again, really, I was always taught that permanent color is only for gray hair or hair that's going lighter. So say you do have a client who's a level 6 and you've highlighted her long enough that she's finally at a level 8 and she doesn't want to do highlights anymore, she just wants to do a retouch. You could actually put a level 8 color on her roots, mix it with 20 volume because there's 2 levels of lift, and that would be her retouch and she'd be good to go. Maybe you could refresh her ends with a demi-permanent as well. All right, so under permanent colors, just know that it's more alkaline than demi-permanents and it's usually mixed with a higher volume. So demi-permanents almost always is going to be 10 volume. I can't even think of a time where demi-permanent was mixed with 20 volume that I can think of. And then permanent color is usually mixed with a 20, 30, 40 volume. That's a lot. So if you guys need more clarification on this, I usually do try to do like a color theory class with you guys specifically when we're in the school. So if any of this isn't making sense, I do not mind making another video going more in depth with everything and kind of re-explaining everything. So anyway, under permanent hair colors, please highlight where it says these dye precursors are called aniline derivatives. So they contain, and it goes on to the next page, contain uncolored dyes that combine with hydrogen peroxide to form larger permanent dye molecules within the cortex. This is what's actually going in there and altering the color. That's right, that's what we do at the cortex. Oh, that was a lot. So then we have a soap cap. So a soap cap, this is what we would do if we put a color on somebody's hair and it got too dark. And maybe they're like, oh, that's just the shade too dark. So this kind of just buffs the color a little bit, just kind of kicks that little bit out. So a soap cap is going to be equal parts shampoo, lightener, and developer. Usually it only sits on the hair for 5-10 minutes. Sometimes if you're doing a major color correction, say you have somebody with like box dye in their hair or something and they want to go like platinum blonde, you could kind of break up that color a little bit with a soap cap and then go in and highlight it or something, depending on kind of what look you're going for. And then highlight where it says permanent hair coloring products are regarded as the best products for covering gray, which we kind of already talked about. So then we have natural and metallic hair colors. So highlight where it says metallic hair colors are also referred to as gradual hair colors. We'll go into that in a second here. Highlight where it says natural hair colors. Now, if you remember, hair colors, one word, is the natural or the artificial hair color. So natural hair colors, right? So this is going to be a natural artificial color. Also known as vegetable hair colors, such as henna, are colors obtained from leaves or barks of the plants. You would think this is better for your hair, but it's not. And I will get into why really quick. It's the same reason why we don't like metallic hair colors. But over on 683, highlight the definition of metallic hair colors. Also known as progressive hair colors, are hair colors containing metal salts that change hair color gradually by progressive buildup and exposure to air, creating a dull metallic appearance. So basically, metallic hair color is a pretty word for box dye. And if you guys have been with me long enough, you do know how I feel about box color. So it's with henna and metallic dyes, it's pretty much the same thing. What happens when you continually put henna and metallic salts in the hair, it builds up and it gets darker and darker, and once those things are put in the hair, you can't get them out. It's impossible to get them out without cutting or damaging the hair. First of all, with box color, there's one formula for every box, and anybody who picks it up and puts it on their hair is getting the same exact formula, regardless of what their hair looks like or their hair type, things like that, right? So when a client comes to us, we're specially formulating their hair color for them. You know what I mean? Like it's their special look, whatever. When you just pick up a box and go, they don't know who's going to pick up the box. So they have to make it so that anybody who puts it on their hair can get the desired result. That's why if you've ever looked at a box color, it has like the 3 different, it'll say like if your hair is this color, this is what it's going to turn out like. If this color, this is what it's going to look like, blah, blah, blah. So for that reason alone, it's not, ideal, right? We will get into developers in a second here, but typically box color developers are 40 volume, which 40 volume tends to be very damaging. On top of that, clients who are doing their own color at home may not always know that they only need to put it on the roots. So if you think about it, maybe for 10 years, they've been putting hair color, like box color on their hair. And it just keeps, they just keep adding that pigment on top over and over and over again. Imagine putting 40 volume on your hair every time you do your hair, every month or so, right? For a long period of time, that's going to create damage over time. 2, when they go to take it out, say they come to us for a color correction and we put lightener on it, their hair is already going to be so compromised that almost anything we put on it is going to melt the hair, literally melt the hair. When we have clients who have box color, it's like playing Russian roulette. Honestly, you never know what's going to happen. So typically, with box colored clients, you either want to have them sign a waiver or make them aware that they're going to have to pay a higher price. It's going to take longer to get it out. They're going to have to pay for higher quality product. For example, Olaplex is a total lifesaver when it comes to coloring or lifting out box color. Yeah, basically metallic salts kind of build up in the hair over time, whereas the hair color we use in the salon, like permanent colors, kind of fade over time a little bit, and they kind of naturally just like shampoo out of the hair. box color usually gets darker and darker over time. So sometimes too, you'll find clients might start out with like a level 6 brunette. But again, because they pull it through their ends every time, it gets darker and darker. It doesn't naturally like fade at all. They might end up being a black box color, and they'll tell you that. They'll be like, I don't know why it's black, and it's because they keep pulling it through. And you can tell usually when somebody box colors their hair because they'll have like lighter roots, you know, and then they'll have like the dark ends. So then we have hydrogen peroxide developers. So we know that developers are going to be the oxidizing agents. This is going to be the acidic solution in the coloring product. So the pH is between 2.5 and 4.5. This comes in like 4 levels, right? So we have 10 volume, 20 volume, 30 volume, 40 volume. So if you want to highlight the definition of volume, it measures the concentration and strength of hydrogen peroxide. So if you remember anything from the pH, pH stands for potential hydrogen. Hydrogen peroxide, you know what I mean? The volume is the strength of it, pretty much. So at the bottom here on that little chart, obviously we know that 10 volume is going to be typically used for deposit only. We can sometimes get one lift out of this, one level of lift in theory, right? Then we have 20 volume. So this one you will want to highlight. It is the standard volume, will give up to 2 levels of lift and is used to achieve most results with permanent hair color and used for complete gray coverage, which we did talk about. 30 volume is going to be an additional lift. It's going to be 3 levels. And then 40 volume is going to be 4 levels of lift. So by the books, in theory standards, right? 10 volume is going to be 1 level, 20 volumes 2 levels, 30 volumes 3 levels, 40 volumes 4 levels of lift, right? I find that 10 volume and 20 volume lift at a more consistent and steady and even pace. So if I know that I'm going to be doing a full head of highlights on somebody, it might take me up, depending on how much hair they have, it might take me up to an hour and a half to get all those foils in their hair. That means the first foils that I put in are going to be in there for a long, long time. 10 and 20 volume do not stop lifting. Whereas 30 and 40 volume lift very quickly. It's almost like an explosion, like it goes boom. It lifts up immediately to that 30 and 40 volume. Once it gets that 3rd or 4th level of lift, it stops lifting, but it's still sitting on the hair, so it's still causing damage. So basically, if the first foils I put in are almost always 20 volume because I know they're going to be on there forever. Only then, once I get towards the end of the head, will I start bumping it up to 35, 40, 30 volume, 40 volume. You can mix 20 and 30 volume to create 25. You can mix 20 volume and 40 volume to create 30 volume if you're ever in a pinch and you run out. So then on 840, we have lighteners. So if you want to highlight the definition of lighteners, they are chemical compounds that lighten hair by dispersing, dissolving, and decolorizing the natural hair pigment. Highlight where it says, this is known as oxidization, a process by which oxygen is released and it occurs within the cortex of the hair shaft. So anytime we want to lift already colored hair, we're going to have to use lightener. There are some scenarios where we can lift the hair with permanent color, but you have to keep in mind that color does not lift color. So if somebody's hair was previously colored with a level 6, the only way we're getting that color out is with lightener. If they're naturally a level 6 and they want to go to like an 8, we can usually put on like a level 8 hair color in theory, and they should be able to get to that color very nicely. With lighteners, it's typically going to be a double-step process. So what that means is it's going to take 2 steps to get them to their final result. So when we lift them, almost always you have to tone them. And that would be the second step, right? Same thing if you've ever heard of like a bleach and tone. That's when somebody's like platinum blonde and you do their lightener retouch. That's another one too, what we talked about earlier. It's lightener, not bleach, but you will hear bleach and tone. So if the hair's already been previously colored, you cannot get it out unless it's lightener. So the decolorizing process. So if you guys remember that level system that we talked about, we have to break through to get from a 1 to a 10. We have to go through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have to go through all those levels before we can get to a 10. What happens when we go to each level, there is an underlying pigment. So if you look on page 685, 1 through 10, it shows you at each level what that underlying pigment is going to be. So when you hear a client say, oh, I pull warm tones, everybody pulls warm tones. They're not special, but we have to make them think they are. I know. So basically, if I have a client who's a level 6 and I want to lift her to a level 9, I'm going to first break through the orange, then I'm going to see gold, then I'm going to see yellow, and then I'm going to get her to a level at the top, which means when I get her to a level 9, she is going to be yellow. So that's why I was saying you will almost always will have to tone a client when you put lightener on them. Now, if you guys remember the color wheel that we talked about, if my client pulls to a level 9 yellow, that means I'm going to be toning her with a violet to cancel that out. So highlight under the decolorizing process, it says, during the process of decolorizing, natural hair can go through as many as 10 stages. This is true. If you go through all 10 stages, the hair will be very damaged. So when we take very dark clients to blonde, we just have to make them aware that it's very damaging. Highlight as well where it says decolorizing the hair's natural melanin pigments allow the colorist to create the exact degree of contributing pigment needed for the final result. So we know that the hair is always going to pull warm, right? So that's why typically clients will say they feel brassy, blah, blah, blah. We need to tone them out with an ashy color or whatever. Sometimes clients actually like those warm tones, but they don't want to be yellow. That's what I was kind of saying like way back in the beginning. You can actually use their underlying pigment to your advantage. If they lift to a yellow, a brassy yellow, but they want to be gold, they don't want to be yellow, we can actually put a neutralizing color on top. So maybe instead of a violet, we just do a neutral to kind of soften that yellow a little bit, but still keep it on the warmer side, right? And that's the fun part about hair colors. You can really customize and create different looks and colors depending on the client's needs and desires. So over on 686, you guys know the two most important parts of any service is the massage and the consultation. So out of all the services that you do as a cosmetologist, hair color is going to be one of the most important, because especially nowadays with social media, clients have an expectation of what they want their hair to look like. And that's our job to be realistic with them, let them know if we can even get them to that stage in one session, things like that. So highlight where it says a hair color consultation is the most critical part of the color service. Anytime you have a new client, you want to make sure you have enough time blocked out with them, because I've had 45-minute consultations with clients before, just trying to understand what they want. I won't go back and mix up their hair color until I have a full understanding of what they want and I know that we're on the same page. So making sure you have enough time for a consultation. Even clients that you've been doing for 10 years, you should still be doing thorough consultations with, because that's the number one reason why clients leave you, is to go to another stylist because they feel like you're not offering them anything new. Say, you know, Rebecca's been coming to you and she's been getting a level 6 retouch since you met her, and she sees a balayage on Pinterest and she's like, well, what the heck, my hairstylist never told me that was what's in style. Let me go to this chick over here. Maybe she'll listen to me. So it's important that we're always just checking in with our clients and making sure that they're happy with it. Even if they, you know, never change their hair. I have this one client, I've been cutting her hair the exact same way since I met her, and every time I ask her, I'm like, is there anything you want me to change? She always says no. Occasionally she'll say, oh, can you trim my bangs, or can you give me bangs, or can you texturize more here, or can you cut this up here a little bit shorter? We always, sometimes she does ask for different things, but for the most part she's always had the same style. But because I give her that option to have something different, she's not stuck in a rut with her hair, right? Of course, we're going to want them to fill out an intake form if they're new. We do have these at the salon. When we're talking to the client, we want to look at their features, what's going to be flattering on them, what tones are going to look good on them. When talking to the client, you want to spin them around and look them in the eye. Or what I like to do is I stand in front of the mirror, so that way they can look at themselves while I'm talking to them. But you never want to look at your client through the mirror and talk to them, because that's impersonal. If you turn them around and look at them eye to eye, that just kind of gives you a little bit more of a connection. Over on 688, of course we want to talk about their hair history, right? So say we had Rebecca come in with her level 6 hair and we just met her. I don't know if she's been going to a salon to get that done, or I don't know if she's been doing that at home herself. So I need to know that. Like I said, again, if she wanted highlights or something, I need to know if I need to add a bond builder or something to it, or if I can even get her to what her goal is because of that. And then from there, we just kind of have to ask them what they're looking for, right? So I do love social media because it helps us kind of understand more what our clients want. But at the same time, you have to be careful with those Pinterest pictures, because a lot of times clients will find a picture of a really pretty lady and they'll say, oh, I want that hair color. But it's not the hair color that they want. A lot of times they just want to look like the model. Sometimes the haircut is not even cute. And like I said, they just want to look like the model's face. So if they show me a cut or color that I don't think is going to be flattering on them, or something I know that they're not going to actually like, I'll cover the model's face up with my thumb or my hand or something, and I'll say, are you sure you like that? Are you sure about that? And then I'll say, are you sure like the bangs will look good, because your head's a little bit more like narrow than hers is, or blah blah blah. And then usually from there they're like, well, I guess you're right, blah, blah. Just be mindful with the social media. If I'm showing clients pictures, I usually show them pictures where the model's face isn't in it, so they can actually just see the hair. And then recommend different options too. Say you have a client who wants to go lighter, you can say to her, well, do you want it to be more like natural, like a blended look, like a balayage, or do you want it to be more like highlights, like more throughout the hair up to the roots? Be honest and don't promise more than you can deliver. So I always say, under promise, over deliver. So I had a client one time, she had hair like this dark. She came in, she's like, I just can never get as blonde as I want. And I knew in my mind that I could get her pretty blonde. But I didn't tell her that because, maybe for some reason I couldn't. So I always say to clients who want to go lighter, I always say, I can get you lighter today, but I can't promise you'll be that light. But you'll definitely leave lighter. You just might not be as light as you want. It's going to be a process, blah, blah, blah. So then I put the highlights in their hair, and then they're blonder than I expected them to be, and they're blonder than they, expected to be. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, you got so light. I'm so happy. And then they're happy because they're like, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. So the classic line that I always use with my blonde clients is, I cannot promise that you're going to be that light today. I usually say about 2 or 3 sessions. So just be honest with your clients. They'll really appreciate that. And they're going to appreciate too that you don't push their hair, that you're not saying like, yeah, let's get you as blonde as we can today, and then fry the crap out of their hair. They're going to respect you more for actually taking the time to do it right and correctly. So gaining approval for the client. So I always just repeat back to them what they said to me. So I'll say, okay, so you want to do a full highlight, and then we'll tone it, and then we'll trim it up, blah, blah, blah. How's that sound? And if they say, yep, that works for me, then I go ahead and proceed. If for some reason they're like, whoa, wait, I don't know what you mean by tone it, then I'll explain to them. And then again, I'll repeat just to make sure that we're on the same page. like I said, I never go to the back unless I'm fully on the same page with my client. And then 2, throughout the service, just talk to them about hair coloring products, how to maintain the color at home, how often they should be coming in to get it done, blah, 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 things like that. And then, of course, at the end of the service, just make sure you write down whatever it was that you used on their hair. So then they talk about the release form. This is not super common to do. Unless I have had clients fill out waivers before in the past, because I had a client one time who had box color on her hair, and she was going through chemo treatment, so her hair was already like compromised and she was already like emotionally vulnerable. So I just made her aware. I was like, hey, you know, if I put lightener on your hair, I don't know what's going to happen. It could potentially damage it. I just don't want you to be upset, and I just want to make sure that you're aware of the possible risk. And she was like, yeah, that's fine. And it ended up turning out fine. But if for some reason it wasn't, I didn't want that to fall back on me. I just wanted to make her aware of it. She was very pushy and persistent, so I was like, hey, I'll do it if you want, but you guys sign a release form. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, you have to make sure you protect yourself. And I think at the end of the day, it's not very binding, not very legally binding, but it's just more so that you and the client are on the same page and you guys are understanding. And if for some reason her hair breaks off and she's like, what, you didn't tell me that? And I'll say, you signed a contract saying that you did know that. So, but anyway, so we're going to leave off there. Next week we'll get into formulating and different application methods and the different types of colors, strand tests, things like that, techniques pretty much. Okay, so again, I feel like the hair coloring chapter is kind of a lot to take in. So if you guys need a more thorough explanation, I don't mind doing more in depth about color theory specifically. We can definitely get into that. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me, and I'll talk to you soon.